The bright lights of New York City lit up the skyline, but inside the Ed Sullivan Theater, the atmosphere was unusually electric, even for late-night television. Stephen Colbert, comfortably seated at his iconic desk, smirked toward the camera. "Tonight," he teased, "we have someone very special joining us. A rising star of the MAGA universe. A woman who thinks facts have a political party." The audience chuckled. Then he added, "Let's welcome Karoline Leavitt." Applause echoed, but it wasn't the warm welcome Colbert usually reserved for his ideological allies. It was tense, the kind of polite clapping that felt more like a countdown to conflict. Karoline walked on stage in a sleek crimson suit, every step deliberate. Her expression was calm, poised, and locked in, the way a fighter looks walking into the ring. She didn't wait for Colbert's opening jab. Instead, she sat down, stared directly at him, and said, "Stephen, I'm here because people are tired of laughing while their country burns." The room fell uncomfortably quiet. Colbert leaned in, feigning interest. "Karoline, I assume you're referring to our comedy, not climate change?" "Actually," she fired back, "I'm talking about the luxury of mocking everyday Americans who can't afford groceries, while you sip cocktails with elites and call it satire." The audience let out a collective gasp. Colbert, momentarily rattled, raised his eyebrows. "So you're suggesting comedy is the enemy?" "I'm suggesting," Karoline said firmly, "that your brand of comedy hides behind a smug moral superiority that looks down on half the country." Cheers broke out, not from the entire audience, but a noticeable section. It was clear, not everyone came to see her fall. Colbert straightened in his chair. "Look, we make fun of everyone here, Republicans, Democrats, presidents." "No, Stephen," she interrupted, "you make fun of America. The America I fight for. You mock it because you don't understand it. Or maybe you just don't respect it anymore." That line hit like a hammer. Colbert grinned tightly, his rhythm clearly disrupted. "Let's keep things civil, Karoline. It's a comedy show." "Then maybe you should stick to comedy," she said coldly. "Because when you lecture Americans on what values they should hold, that's not entertainment. That's propaganda dressed in a punchline." The camera cut to Colbert, uncharacteristically silent for a beat. The tension was no longer playful. This wasn't a late-night giggle fest. This was war, and Karoline Leavitt had just declared it live, in front of millions. Colbert shuffled his note cards, clearly buying time. His smirk faltered just enough to betray that Karoline had struck a nerve. "Okay," he finally said, his tone sharper now, "so you're saying comedy isn't allowed to challenge power anymore?" Karoline's eyes narrowed. "You're not challenging power, Stephen, you are power. You have a nationwide platform, millions of viewers, and the backing of corporate media. When you belittle working-class Americans and conservatives from this desk, you're not punching up, you're punching down." A low rumble of murmurs rippled through the audience. Some clapped. Others whispered. Colbert leaned back, folding his arms. "You're saying I'm the bully here?" "I'm saying people are tired of elites pretending they're still the underdog," she said coolly. "You mock America from a Manhattan studio with champagne in the green room. I defend it in the real world, where people are struggling to make ends meet while being told by people like you that their values are backwards." He laughed, but it lacked confidence. Okay. So what are these noble values we're all supposedly mocking?" "Faith, family, freedom," she said simply. "The things that built this country while you were busy writing monologues about bathroom politics and calling that bravery." That got a few groans from the audience, but also a loud cheer. Colbert's face tightened. Karoline pressed on. "You think politics is a punchline. But to millions of Americans, it's survival. You think patriotism is cringe. I think it's courage. That's the difference between us, Stephen. I'm not here to be liked. I'm here because people like you keep mocking what they love." Colbert sat up straighter now, clearly rattled. "You know, Karoline, I used to play a conservative character. You sound more cartoonish than I ever did. She didn't blink. That's the difference. You played it for laughs. I live it with purpose. The studio was no longer laughing. There was an eerie pause. Even the crew behind the cameras looked on edge. Karoline turned slightly to the audience. They say when you speak the truth in a room full of lies, it sounds outrageous. Well, here I am. A few people in the crowd started clapping, slowly at first, then louder. Colbert raised a hand, trying to recover control. Let's go to commercial. But it was too late. The fire was lit. The segment wasn't comedy anymore, it was confrontation. And Karoline Leavitt had just flipped the script on live television. The commercial break couldn't come fast enough for Colbert's production team. Behind the scenes, a flurry of producers scrambled to regroup, mouths pressed to earpieces, trying to decide whether to soften the next segment or double down. On the stage, Karoline remained composed, glancing calmly around as makeup artists hovered nearby. None dared approach her. When the cameras went live again, Colbert attempted a reset. "We're back," he said with forced cheer. "And I'm still joined by Karoline Leavitt, who, I have to say, could teach a masterclass in spirited disagreement." Karoline smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Thanks, Stephen. I'm just tired of watching people cheer while their own country is ridiculed." Colbert pushed forward, trying to regain rhythm. "But don't you think satire plays a role in democracy? Isn't it our job to question authority?" "You don't question authority," she replied smoothly. "You enforce a narrative. And you don't speak truth to power, you mock the powerless who refuse to adopt your worldview." That stung. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "That's not fair. I've criticized Democrats too." Karoline didn't hesitate. "Yes, with velvet gloves. You roast Republicans with a blowtorch and Democrats with a feather duster. Your audience laughs, but half the country feels like they're being laughed at, not with. That's not satire. That's elitism." The crowd tensed again. Colbert tried another tack. "So you want comedians to be neutral?" "I want them to be honest," she said. "And if you can't be honest, at least don't pretend to speak for all Americans. Because you don't. You speak for a studio audience in New York. I speak for people who can't afford to laugh right now." Her voice had weight. The mood in the room had shifted from banter to reckoning. Colbert leaned back and exhaled, trying to laugh it off. "Karoline, do you ever take a break from being this intense?" She smirked. "Not when the stakes are this high." And in that moment, it was clear, this wasn't just a guest appearance, it was an ambush on comfort zones, a challenge to the culture of smugness that had ruled late night for decades. Karoline had entered enemy territory and refused to play nice. The audience didn't know whether to cheer or hold their breath. But one thing was certain, no one would forget this night. Colbert's smile had all but vanished. The usual rhythm of dominance, a well-timed jab, a clever quip, audience laughter, had failed him. Karoline Leavitt wasn't here to entertain. She was here to confront, and the energy in the room knew it. He tried a last pivot. "So what would your America look like, Karoline? One without shows like mine? Without dissent? Without humor?" Karoline leaned forward, her voice cool, unshaken. "My America looks like this. You can say whatever you want. But you don't get to mock faith, family, and patriotism and expect zero pushback. Dissent? I welcome it. But what you do isn't dissent, it's derision. There's a difference." The audience was now silent. It wasn't awkward, it was electric. The kind of silence that follows truth. Colbert stammered slightly. "Well, I think we have a difference in opinion on what comedy is." "Exactly," she replied. "You think comedy is safe when it only targets one side. I think real comedy risks offending everyone, not just the people you already disagree with." A producer offstage signaled frantically. This segment was supposed to be 6 minutes. It was heading into 10. But cutting it short now would only confirm what some watching already suspected, that Colbert couldn't handle a real debate. Karoline, unfazed, continued. You want to joke about America? Fine. But when you make your audience laugh by belittling the very people who built this country, coal workers, truckers, single moms, soldiers, you're not punching up. You're punching them in the gut. Colbert tried to interrupt, but she held the floor. And then, you turn around and act like the brave truth-teller. No, Stephen. You're not brave for mocking people who don't clap back. You're comfortable. And this country doesn't need more comfortable people pretending they're courageous. The crowd shifted. A few applause lines broke through. One voice yelled, "Let her talk." Colbert blinked. Karoline stared straight at him. You sit behind a desk in a climate-controlled studio. I've been on the ground in border towns. I've talked to families crushed by inflation and crime. And when I speak for them, when I fight for them, people like you roll your eyes. That's what I came here to say. Not everyone finds your jokes funny. A long pause. Then, scattered applause again, louder this time. Colbert took a sip of water, visibly rattled. This wasn't the showdown he had planned. But it was the one that was happening. The producers considered cutting to commercial, but something about the tension on set, the unraveling of control, was too potent to interrupt. For years, Stephen Colbert had orchestrated the late-night stage like a maestro. But tonight, he was playing defense. And Karoline Leavitt? She was conducting the storm. Colbert cleared his throat, forcing a grin. So, Karoline, you believe it's dangerous to make fun of powerful people, but only if they lean your direction? She didn't blink. No. I think it's dangerous to punch down while pretending you're punching up. There's nothing rebellious about a millionaire mocking a working-class dad in a diner because he voted for someone you don't like. The audience shifted again. Some folded arms. Others leaned in. The usual partisan reflexes were being tested. Colbert chuckled nervously. Well, I do mock Trump quite a bit. Guilty as charged. Karoline tilted her head. Sure. But while you're mocking Trump, you're also mocking the people who feel like they've been ignored their whole lives. The people who voted for him not because they worship him, but because no one else listened. Not you. Not the media. Not DC. She paused. And then when I speak for them? You paint me as dangerous. Colbert tried to soften the mood with sarcasm. Wow. So now I'm the elite boogeyman? You said it, not me, she replied, her smile sharp. The audience laughed, reluctantly, tensely. But it was laughter with a different tone, one of acknowledgement. Karoline had flipped the dynamic. Colbert tried to regain ground. Okay, let's say everything you're saying is true. What would you have me do? Stop being funny? Apologize for being a liberal? Karoline shrugged. I'd have you listen. Just once. To someone outside your bubble. And maybe, just maybe, realize that not everyone who disagrees with you is a punchline. Silence again. Not awkward, just raw. She added, her voice quieter, more grounded, you have influence, Stephen. Millions listen to you. And right now, America is breaking into two countries. If all you do is feed one side and humiliate the other, you're not a comedian anymore. You're a divider with a monologue. The camera slowly panned. The expressions in the audience had shifted. No more smirks. No more shallow chuckles. Just thought. Colbert leaned back, subdued. You came here swinging. Karoline nodded. I came here honest. Colbert straightened in his chair, visibly regrouping. The rhythm of the show had slipped away from him, and he knew it. But he wasn't ready to wave the white flag, not yet. Well, Karoline, he said, forcing levity back into his tone, you're certainly not afraid to throw punches on national TV. But do you ever worry that your version of honesty sounds a lot like anger? Karoline didn't hesitate. No, Stephen. What you're hearing isn't anger. It's urgency. There's a difference. She leaned forward, her hands folded neatly, gaze sharp. You sit in a studio built by a massive network. I came up fighting for every inch of space I've gotten. So when I speak, it's not rage, it's responsibility. Because if I don't say it, nobody will. Colbert opened his mouth, but she cut in, not with aggression, but with control. You call it anger because it makes it easier to dismiss. It's the same thing the media always does, labels someone passionate as hysterical or extreme, so they don't have to listen. Colbert blinked, caught off guard by her precision. Karoline continued, but people watching this, the ones you don't usually talk to, they're not outraged because I said something controversial. They're relieved. Because finally, someone is sitting across from you who isn't trying to earn your approval. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Not loud, but unmistakable. Karoline's tone softened slightly, but her conviction didn't waver. You say you mock Trump, sure. But look closer. You mock belief. You mock tradition. You mock struggle, unless it fits a narrative you've approved. That's not bravery, that's branding. Colbert looked toward the crew, uncertain. For the first time in his career, he was outmaneuvered on his own turf. And by the way, Karoline added, I don't care if you're liberal. But don't pretend you're the voice of all truth when half the country sees you as the guy who laughs at them for sport. The silence was deafening. She glanced to the audience. You don't have to agree with me. But if you're willing to listen, maybe you'll finally hear what millions of Americans have been screaming for years. Colbert gave a slow nod. You came prepared. Karoline offered a small smile. I came for the people who never get invited to sit in this chair. Colbert exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair, the grin fading into something closer to unease. The crowd was silent, as if waiting to see whether he'd recover or retreat. You know, he began, choosing his words more cautiously now, it's easy to throw stones at someone in this chair. It's harder to understand what we're trying to do, make people laugh, give them something to hold on to in chaotic times. Karoline nodded, but didn't give him room to hide in sentimentality. Humor's a powerful thing, Stephen. It can build bridges, or burn them. And when the laughter only ever punches one direction, eventually, someone punches back. The crowd let out a slight gasp, not dramatic, but charged. Colbert attempted to steer back into safer territory. Well, if we're talking about comedy and fairness, where's the line, Karoline? Should I start making fun of conservatives less? Tell fewer Trump jokes? Karoline tilted her head, her tone calm but cutting. No. You can tell all the jokes you want. Just don't pretend it's harmless when it feeds a culture that labels people who disagree as stupid, racist, or backward. That's not humor. That's arrogance disguised as entertainment. Her words hit with the weight of something unsaid for too long. Colbert was quiet, absorbing the shift in the room, the friction, the hesitation, the unspoken agreement from unexpected corners of his own audience. Karoline added, there are millions of Americans who feel invisible. And when the only time they hear their values mentioned on TV is in a punchline, they stop laughing. They tune out. Or worse, they tune into rage. That line echoed, even off camera. Stephen looked toward the audience, then back at her. So what do you want me to do? Stop the show? Change who I am? Karoline shook her head. I want you to be aware of the weight your voice carries. Because people are listening. And they're tired of being told by millionaires that their lives are a joke. A beat of silence. You mock America, Stephen, she added, her voice low, unwavering. I fight for it. The crowd buzzed, not in laughter this time, but in reckoning. The studio, usually filled with laughter and well-timed applause, felt like a courtroom now. Stephen Colbert sat straighter than before, less the confident host and more the witness under cross-examination. He cleared his throat. You say you fight for America, Karoline. But let's be honest, your version of America looks different than mine. It's conservative. It's rural. It's exclusive. Karoline's expression didn't flinch. No, Stephen. My version of America is working class. It's built by people who wake up at 5 a.m. and don't have the luxury of talking politics over lattes. Some audience members chuckled nervously. She went on, it's not exclusive. It's just not curated. And that scares elites like you. Because if you really acknowledged the millions of Americans you mock or ignore, you'd have to admit your platform is one-sided. Stephen raised an eyebrow. So you want more conservative voices on comedy shows? No, she said, I want honesty. If your show's mission is to be a liberal megaphone, say it. But don't dress it up as middle ground satire when your punchlines always land on the same people. The crowd was listening more closely now, some shifting in their seats, others nodding. Colbert leaned in, tone softening. Do you really believe I hate this country? Karoline paused, choosing her words like a scalpel. I think you've forgotten what it feels like to need this country. You live above the fight. The rest of us are still in it. He blinked. That one hit deep. I'm not asking you to become conservative, Stephen, she continued. I'm asking you to stop pretending that heartland Americans are the punchline of every joke you tell just because it earns a cheer in a New York studio. She glanced at the cameras. Because America isn't just watching. It's remembering. Colbert's trademark smirk didn't return. He looked out toward the crowd, and then back to her, quieter than before. Well, Karoline, tonight you made your voice heard. Karoline gave a small nod. And I didn't need a script to do it. The camera stayed tight on Colbert's face, a man known for quick wit now grasping for footing. For a brief moment, he looked not like the king of late night, but like someone facing a truth he hadn't prepared for. Karoline turned slightly to address the audience, not just in the studio, but the millions watching from home. This isn't about comedy, she said, her voice firmer now. This is about power. Cultural power. Narrative control. You mock conservatives like we're relics. But we're the ones driving trucks, raising kids, building homes, defending borders. She pointed lightly toward Colbert, not in aggression, but in challenge. Meanwhile, elites like you sit in million-dollar studios, lecturing the rest of us on truth and justice, without ever living the consequences of your policies. A ripple of discomfort ran through the crowd. Not everyone agreed, but no one could deny the intensity in her words. Colbert tried to pivot. So your solution is what? To silence late-night TV? To shut down dissent? Karoline shook her head. No. My solution is accountability. You want to mock? Fine. But don't act shocked when someone finally stands up and says, you don't speak for me. Because, Stephen, you don't. Her eyes locked with his. You represent a bubble. I represent the people who've been outside it for far too long. There was no applause sign needed now. The studio erupted, some in cheers, some in stunned silence. A young man in the second row stood up and clapped slowly, drawing others to join. Others remained seated, arms crossed. Colbert chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Well, Karoline, I'll give you this, you've brought more heat to this stage than most politicians we've had on. She smiled slightly. I'm not here to be polite. I'm here to be real. The producers backstage were scrambling now, phones lighting up, segment directors signaling the control room. Social media was already ablaze. Hashtag Colbert vs. Karoline was trending within minutes. Colbert leaned back. One more question, he said. If you had this stage, this exact seat, what would you say to America? Karoline stared into the camera. I'd say this, they've laughed at you. They've lied to you. But they can't ignore you forever. Because we're not backing down. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the atmosphere thickened, no longer just a talk show, but a battleground of ideals. Colbert folded his hands, trying to reclaim control. You really believe you're the future of American discourse? Karoline didn't miss a beat. No. I believe I'm the correction to the current one. A few gasps from the audience. One woman near the front clutched her pearls. Another whispered, "She's not wrong." Karoline leaned forward. The reason this moment matters isn't because I'm right-wing. It's because I showed up. And too many of us haven't. We let pop culture call us backward, racist, irrelevant, and we stayed quiet. She turned slightly toward the live audience. Not anymore. Colbert glanced to the side, visibly wrestling with how to respond. A seasoned performer, but one now confronting an opponent who didn't play by late-night rules. She wasn't laughing, and she wasn't scared. Karoline, he finally said, choosing each word carefully, there's a difference between being bold and being divisive. She raised an eyebrow. And there's a difference between being funny and being dishonest. Boom. The crowd buzzed with electricity. Phones were out, recording. Comments were flooding in online by the second. X, TikTok, YouTube, clips were already being clipped. She sat back, arms resting confidently. I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to remind millions watching that their voice still matters, even when people like you say otherwise. Colbert sighed, half amused, half defeated. Well, congratulations. You've just turned this into the most viral show we've aired in years. Karoline smiled, her eyes sharp. Good. Because America's been waiting to speak for a long time. As the credits rolled, the tension still hung in the air. But there was no mistaking it. Karoline Leavitt had come into the lion's den, and left with its roar in her hands. And there you have it, a confrontation that shook the room and echoed far beyond the studio walls. Karoline Leavitt didn't just challenge Stephen Colbert, she challenged a cultural stronghold, unafraid and unapologetic. Whether you agree or not, one thing is clear, voices that were once dismissed are now speaking louder than ever. If you believe in fearless conversation, in standing your ground even when it's uncomfortable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because the next showdown could be even bigger.